The first mistake the alien general made was believing humans feared pain. Red emergency lights pulsed across the interrogation chamber like a dying heartbeat, while the Carvax warship groaned under distant plasma turbulence somewhere beyond its armored hull. The air smelled of hot metal, recycled oxygen, and burned circuitry. Commander Ethan Cross hung from magnetic restraint chains in the center of the room, boots barely touching the steel floor as thin trails of blood slid down his forearms and dripped into the grated drain beneath him. 43 hours. That was how long the Carvax Dominion had questioned him since the destruction of the Earth frigate Resolute. 43 hours without sleep, without food, without silence. Yet somehow, the human still stood upright. General Valyra Thorne circled him slowly, the polished heels of her black ceremonial armor clicking against the deck, plating with mechanical precision. She towered over him by nearly a foot, crimson skin glowing beneath the harsh overhead lights, while golden eyes studied him with the cold patience of a predator deciding where to bite next. Her silver hair was braided tightly behind her head in the style of Carvax war commanders, not a strand out of place despite the chaos consuming sectors of the galaxy outside these walls. "Your species continues to disappoint me," she said calmly. Earth's soldiers were described as resilient. "I see only exhaustion." Ethan lifted his head slowly. Sweat darkened strands of dirty blonde hair hanging over one eye, but his expression barely changed. "You should see me before coffee." A nearby alien officer stiffened in visible disbelief. Valyra did not smile. She stepped closer until Ethan could feel the heat radiating from her armor's power core. 3 destroyers destroyed. 200 Carvax dead. Tell me where the surviving human fleet escaped, and your suffering ends. Ethan looked directly into her glowing eyes. "You first." The chamber fell silent except for the distant hum of reactor engines somewhere deep inside the vessel. Valyra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had interrogated rebels, pirates, assassins, and rival admirals from systems older than Earth itself. Every living creature broke eventually. Fear was universal. Pain was universal. Yet the human in front of her treated both like weather. One of the science officers near the observation console shifted nervously. "General," his vitals remained stable. Valyra glanced toward the monitor. She already knew. Human heart rate elevated but controlled. Oxygen levels steady. Neural stress indicators unusually low despite prolonged physical strain. It made no logical sense. Ethan coughed once, then straightened again against the restraints with visible effort. The magnetic chains groaned softly under the movement. "You done staring?" he asked quietly. "Or is this the part where you threaten me again?" A faint ripple passed through the watching officers. Not amusement, unease. Valyra stepped forward and gripped Ethan's jaw with armored fingers, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You mistake endurance for strength, human." Ethan's lips curved slightly despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "No," he whispered. "You mistake Earth for a civilized planet." For the first time since entering the chamber, General Valyra Thorne felt something cold move beneath her ribs. Not fear. Not yet. But something dangerously close to curiosity. The interrogation chamber door sealed shut behind General Valyra with a hydraulic hiss that echoed through the corridor like the closing of a vault. For several seconds, she stood motionless outside the observation glass, staring at the human through the dim red light bleeding across the room. Ethan Cross remained hanging from the restraint chains exactly where she had left him. Head lowered, shoulders heavy, completely still except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. Most prisoners begged by now. Some screamed. Others tried bargaining with dignity they no longer possessed. The human did none of those things. That bothered her more than she cared to admit. "General." Valyra turned sharply as Chief Science Officer Relic approached, carrying a glowing data slate against his narrow chest. The pale gray alien adjusted the lenses over his secondary eyes before speaking carefully. "We completed another biological scan on the human prisoner, and..." Relic hesitated. "There are abnormalities." Valyra almost laughed at the understatement. "Define abnormalities." The scientist activated the display between them. Rotating scans of Ethan's skeletal structure appeared in blue light. Dense bone layering, reinforced muscle fibers, elevated neural conductivity. The data rolled endlessly beside streams of translated medical annotations from captured Earth databases. Human physiology evolved under conditions considered lethal by most known species, Relic explained quietly. Their homeworld gravity is nearly 30% higher than Karvak's standard. Their immune systems operate in constant combat against microscopic predators. Their bodies release chemical stimulants during stress that temporarily override physical exhaustion. Veolyra folded her arms. Every species adapts to its environment. Not like this. Relic enlarged a section of the scan. Tiny fractures lined Ethan's left forearm where restraint pressure had exceeded safety thresholds hours ago. Yet the surrounding muscle tissue had already begun stabilizing the damage naturally. The human should not remain conscious. Veolyra looked through the glass again. Ethan finally raised his head slightly as though sensing he was being watched. One bruised eye opened beneath strands of sweat-soaked blonde hair. Even from 30 feet away, she saw the faint smirk touch the corner of his mouth. The scientist lowered his voice further. There is another concern. Speak. Pain response. Veolyra glanced back at him. Relic swallowed carefully. He is controlling it. Silence settled between them while distant engine vibrations rolled through the massive warship. Somewhere far below, fighter squadrons launched from carrier bays into the darkness of open space. Veolyra stepped closer to the glass. Impossible. No, General. Intentional. Relic brought up another chart. His neural activity spikes whenever stress increases, but moments later he suppresses the response through conscious regulation. We believe human soldiers undergo resistance conditioning from early military training. Veolyra studied the prisoner again. Ethan slowly flexed one hand. Against the magnetic restraints. The muscles in his forearm trembled once before going still again. Controlled. Measured. Like a predator conserving energy. Humans are classified as a level 9 Deathworld species for a reason, Relic whispered. Most civilizations avoid direct war with them. Veolyra's golden eyes narrowed. Yet Earth still lost this battle. Perhaps, the scientist replied carefully. But I no longer believe they lose the way other species do. Inside the chamber, Ethan suddenly lifted his gaze directly toward the observation glass. Toward her. He could not possibly see through the polarized surface. Yet Veolyra felt a strange pressure settle in the room anyway, as if the human somehow knew exactly where she stood. Then, slowly, Ethan smiled again. Not confidently, not arrogantly, patiently. And for the first time in many years, General Veolyra Thorne felt the unpleasant sensation of uncertainty crawl beneath her armor like cold water. The lights inside Detention Sector 7 dimmed automatically to simulated night cycle, washing the steel corridors in deep crimson shadows while cold air drifted through the ventilation grates above. Most of the warship slept during low cycle hours. Engines hummed softer. Voices disappeared. Even soldiers moved quietly beneath the distant pulse of reactor cores somewhere deep inside the vessel. General Veolyra Thorne walked alone through the corridor toward the human prisoner's containment chamber with measured steps that echoed softly against the black floor plating. 2 guards stationed outside the cell immediately straightened. General, one of them said cautiously, the prisoner has remained awake for another 6 hours. Veolyra stopped. 6? Yes, General. No signs of unconsciousness. The second guard hesitated before adding, he has been moving. Veolyra's eyes narrowed. Moving how? Neither guard answered immediately. That alone irritated her. Finally, the first guard activated the chamber display beside the door. Interior surveillance footage flickered across the screen in grainy monochrome light. Ethan Cross sat on the floor beneath the magnetic restraints connected to the wall behind him. One arm hung at an unnatural angle near his shoulder from stress damage caused during restraint transfer earlier in the cycle. Veolyra recognized the injury immediately. Karvak's warriors required surgical stabilization for less severe dislocations. But the human was not calling for medical assistance. He was studying the injury quietly like a mechanic examining damaged machinery. Then, slowly, Ethan braced one boot against the wall beside him. The guards shifted uncomfortably while the footage continued. Ethan inhaled once. Muscles tightened across his shoulders beneath torn prison fabric. Then came a sharp mechanical crack that echoed through the recording. One guard visibly flinched at the sound. Ethan closed his eyes briefly afterward, breathing hard through clenched teeth while sweat rolled down the side of his face. But there was no scream. No panic. No begging. 30 seconds later, he flexed the repaired arm once and leaned his head back against the wall like nothing had happened. Silence settled over the corridor. Veolyra stared at the frozen frame on the monitor. He repaired the joint himself, one guard whispered carefully. Without assistance. The second lowered his voice further. Without sedation. Veolyra deactivated the display and stepped toward the chamber window. Inside, Ethan sat exactly where the footage ended, one arm resting loosely across his knee, head lowered, breathing steady. He looked exhausted now, truly exhausted, yet somehow still dangerous. As though fatigue itself had become another weapon, he knew how to survive. Veolyra pressed the control panel beside the door. Hydraulic locks disengaged with a low hiss. "General?" the guards asked nervously. "Remain outside." The chamber opened. Cold recycled air brushed against her skin as she entered. Ethan did not immediately react. Only after the heavy door sealed behind her did he slowly lift his eyes toward her through the dim red light. "You know," he said hoarsely, "most people knock first." Veolyra ignored the comment. "Why?" Ethan blinked once. "Why what? Why endure this?" she asked quietly. "No rescue fleet is coming. Your command abandoned you during the battle. Yet you continue, resisting interrogation despite overwhelming odds." Ethan studied her silently for several seconds. The reactor vibrations beneath the floor pulsed between them like a distant heartbeat. Finally he answered, "You think survival is resistance." His voice remained rough from dehydration, but calm. "For humans, survival is just habit." Veolyra folded her arms slowly. "Habit does not explain loyalty." Ethan looked down briefly at the metal floor before speaking again. "Where I come from, you do not leave people behind just because things get ugly." Veolyra almost responded immediately, almost argued, but something about the quiet certainty in his voice stopped her. Because he believed it completely, not as military doctrine, not as propaganda, as truth. Ethan leaned his head back against the wall again, visibly drained now from exhaustion and pain finally catching up to him. "That is the problem with empires," he murmured toward the ceiling. "You all think fear keeps people loyal." Veolyra's golden eyes narrowed slightly. "And what keeps humans loyal?" Ethan closed his eyes. A faint, tired smile touched his face again. "Each other." Hours later, the warship drifted through the darkness between star systems, with engines glowing pale blue outside reinforced observation windows, while thousands of Carvax personnel continued their routines beneath layers of steel and command protocols. Yet rumors about the human prisoner had already spread across multiple decks. Soldiers whispered in mess halls. Mechanics paused beside reactor conduits to exchange theories. Some claimed the human had survived interrogation chemicals that would stop a Carvax heart instantly. Others insisted he had smiled while resetting broken bones inside his cell. Every version grew stranger than the last. General Veolyra Thorne ignored the rumors. At least she tried to. She stood alone inside the command observation chamber overlooking the endless blackness of space, while streams of tactical data scrolled across towering holographic displays around her. Usually the silence of the stars calmed her thoughts. Tonight it only sharpened them. "You are distracted." Veolyra turned as Admiral Sarikar entered. The chamber behind her. The older commander moved slowly due to age, but his presence still carried the weight of decades spent conquering systems in the name of the Dominion. His dark armor reflected the pale glow of nearby star fields as he approached the observation glass beside her. "The human prisoner," he said quietly. It was not a question. Veolyra kept her gaze forward. "He is unusual." Sarikar gave a low hum of amusement. "Humans always are." That answer surprised her slightly. "You have encountered them before?" "Once." The Admiral folded his hands behind his back. "During the Outer Rim conflicts 15 years ago, we captured a human pilot after his fighter crashed into a mining colony." Veolyra glanced toward him, and Sarikar remained silent for several seconds. The human dragged 2 injured Carvax soldiers out of a reactor fire before collapsing from blood loss. Veolyra frowned slightly. Why would he save enemy soldiers? We asked him the same question. The old admiral stared out into the stars with distant eyes. "Do you know what he said?" Veolyra did not answer. Sarikar's expression darkened slightly. "He said he was not saving enemies. He was saving people." The room fell quiet except for the distant vibration of engines beneath the floor. Veilira crossed her arms slowly. Compassion does not win wars. No, Sarikar agreed softly. But it survives them. Before she could respond, the chamber lights suddenly flickered once. Then again, warning indicators flashed briefly across nearby tactical screens before stabilizing. Veilira immediately straightened. Report. A communications officer hurried toward them from across the bridge. Minor power fluctuations in the lower sectors, General. Engineering is investigating. Sarikar narrowed his eyes slightly. This far from the frontier, another flicker rolled through the chamber. Longer this time. Somewhere deep inside the ship, metal groaned softly like something immense shifting within the walls. Veilira felt the vibration through her boots. The officer swallowed uneasily. Thermal sensors also detected unexplained movement signatures near cargo ring 4. Veilira turned sharply. Pirates. Unknown. The officer hesitated. The signatures appeared for 6 seconds and then vanished. Silence settled over the bridge again. Veilira felt something cold tighten beneath her ribs without fully understanding why. Not fear. Instinct. The same instinct that had kept her alive through 20 years of military command. Sarikar slowly looked toward her. Perhaps your human prisoner is not the only dangerous thing aboard this vessel. At that exact moment, alarms exploded across the entire warship. Crimson emergency lights flooded the bridge while automated warnings echoed through every corridor. Hull breach detected. Hull breach detected. Unidentified organisms aboard the vessel. Veilira's eyes widened slightly as tactical displays lit up with rapidly spreading red markers moving through the lower decks. Fast. Too fast. Soldiers shouted across the bridge while weapon systems activated automatically throughout the ship. Then the communications officer froze in horror at his console. General, his voice dropped to almost a whisper. The containment sectors just lost power. And somewhere deep below the command deck, magnetic prison locks disengaged with a metallic click. The instant the containment locks failed, every light inside detention sector 7 died at once. Darkness swallowed the corridor except for rotating emergency strobes casting violent red flashes across steel walls and drifting clouds of cold vapor pouring from overloaded vents above. Somewhere far below the ship, alarms screamed through the decks with mechanical urgency, while distant impacts rattled the hull hard enough to shake dust loose from ceiling panels. Ethan Cross opened his eyes slowly inside the darkness of his cell. For several seconds he did not move. He simply listened. Heavy footsteps running overhead. Weapon fire echoing somewhere distant. Then another sound reached him beneath the chaos. Metal bending. Not machinery. Something else. Something alive. Ethan exhaled quietly through his nose. That is not good, he muttered to himself. The magnetic restraints holding his wrists released fully with a sharp click as backup power failed across the detention wing. Ethan pulled. One arm free slowly, wincing as stiff muscles protested after days in captivity. The room spun briefly when he stood. Dehydration. Sleep deprivation. Too many hours under interrogation lights. His body felt like an engine running on fumes. But it was still running. That mattered. He rolled his repaired shoulder carefully while emergency lights pulsed across the cell walls. Then came screaming from the far end of the corridor. Not panic. Combat. Ethan stepped toward the small observation window beside the chamber door and looked out. Carvax guards sprinted through the corridor carrying plasma rifles, while overhead warning sirens blared nonstop. One soldier slammed into the wall hard enough to dent the plating before disappearing around a corner. Another shouted something into a communicator before static swallowed the transmission entirely. Then the corridor lights flickered again. Ethan saw it for less than a second. A shape moving across the ceiling above the guards. Massive. Fast. Wrong. One of the soldiers looked up too late. The lights cut out completely before Ethan could see more. Silence followed. Sudden and unnatural. Then came the sound of metal scraping slowly across steel somewhere outside his cell. Ethan stepped back instinctively. Even after years in the Earth Frontier Corps, his survival instincts rarely reacted like this. The sound reminded him of deep ocean predators from Earth documentaries he watched as a kid. Quiet things. Patient things. Hunters that moved before prey even realized danger existed. Another impact shook the deck violently beneath his boots. This one closer. The chamber door flickered as emergency systems struggled to maintain partial power. Ethan glanced toward the discarded restraint unit beside the wall and immediately moved. Within seconds, he tore loose a section of reinforced magnetic alloy from the damaged mechanism. Improvised weapon, heavy enough to crack bone if necessary. Old Marine habits returned automatically despite the exhaustion clawing at his body. Footsteps approached rapidly outside. Ethan raised the metal bar instinctively as the chamber door suddenly burst open. General Valera Thorne stumbled inside. Breathing hard, ceremonial armor scorched from shoulder to hip, while emergency lights painted her crimson skin almost black beneath the flashing red glow. She froze the instant she saw Ethan standing free beside the shattered restraints. For one dangerous second, neither moved. Ethan held the alloy weapon tightly in one hand. Valera's plasma sidearm remained raised toward his chest. Alarms screamed through the corridor behind her, while distant impacts shook the walls again. Then something slammed into the outer corridor hard enough to bend steel. Both of them heard it. Valera's eyes shifted toward the sound first. Ethan noticed immediately. Fear. Small. Controlled. But real. Another metallic shriek echoed outside, followed by silence once more. Ethan slowly lowered the alloy bar first. Whatever is out there, he said quietly. It is hunting. Valera stared at him in disbelief. You are still thinking tactically? Ethan gave a tired half-smile despite everything. Lady, I grew up on Earth. Another impact hit the corridor doors outside. Closer this time. Ethan glanced toward the shaking steel entrance and tightened his grip on the weapon again. Trust me, he said softly. You are about to learn why that matters. The corridor outside the containment chamber looked like the inside of a dying machine. Smoke drifted through flashing crimson lights while emergency bulkheads attempted to seal deck sections one by one, with thunderous metallic impacts echoing through the warship. Somewhere deeper below, automated defense turrets fired in controlled bursts before abruptly falling silent. Ethan Cross stepped carefully into the hallway beside General Valera Thorne, his breathing slower now despite the exhaustion weighing on every muscle in his body. He still held the broken restraint bar in one hand. Primitive weapon. Heavy. Reliable. Valera noticed the way he scanned the corridor immediately. Not randomly. Methodically. Ceiling vents. Corners. Reflection angles and shattered panels. Every movement carried the instinctive awareness of someone who had survived dangerous places for a very long time. You have fought these creatures before, she said quietly while checking the charge level on her plasma sidearm. No, Ethan answered. But I know predators. Another low scraping sound rolled through the ventilation shafts above them. Both stopped instantly. Ethan raised one hand slightly without looking at her. Wait. Valera almost protested out of instinct. She was a Carvax general, supreme commander of this vessel. Yet something in the human's posture silenced her before words formed. Ethan tilted his head slightly toward the ceiling, listening. The ship itself seemed to hold its breath around them. Then the scraping stopped completely. Ethan exhaled once. Still there, he whispered. Just watching us now. Valera felt cold irritation crawl beneath her armor. Your confidence is remarkable for a prisoner. Ethan glanced at her briefly while continuing down the corridor. Your species keeps calling me that. Another explosion trembled through the deck plating beneath their boots. Emergency lights flickered violently for 2 seconds before stabilizing again. Ahead of them, a pair of Carvax soldiers stumbled around the corner carrying an injured crewman between them. Relief flashed across their faces at the sight of the general. Command deck reports multiple infestations across lower sectors. One soldier said rapidly. The creatures appeared from inside the cargo holds. Motion trackers cannot lock onto them consistently. The second soldier looked toward Ethan with visible distrust. Why is the prisoner loose? Before Valera could answer, the corridor lights above them suddenly died. Complete darkness swallowed the hall. The injured crewman began breathing faster in panic. Ethan immediately grabbed the nearest soldier by the shoulder and shoved him hard against the wall beside the others. Do not move, he said sharply. What? The soldier snapped back. Then everyone heard it. Soft metallic tapping above them. Slow. Deliberate. Like claws dragging gently across steel pipes. Ethan lowered his voice almost to a whisper. On Earth, predators chase movement first. Valera tightened her grip on the plasma weapon. How can you possibly know that applies here? Ethan's tired eyes never left the darkness overhead. Because Evolution always rewards the same hunters. The tapping continued for several agonizing seconds directly above them. Then suddenly it moved away down the corridor's ceiling and vanished into the darkness ahead. Silence followed. No one moved. Finally, the emergency lights flickered back online. One of the soldiers stared at Ethan in disbelief. "How did you know?" Ethan released a slow breath through his nose. "Because fear makes noise." Veilira studied him carefully while the others regrouped around them. The human was exhausted, dehydrated, barely armed. Yet somehow every person in the corridor had unconsciously begun following his lead. Even her own soldiers. That realization unsettled her more than the creatures hunting the ship. Ethan looked toward the nearest emergency display panel glowing beside the corridor intersection. A map of the warship flickered weakly across the damaged screen. Large sections of lower decks already pulsed red. "Those things are hurting people," he said quietly. Veilira frowned. "For what purpose?" Ethan's expression darkened slightly as he studied the spreading red sectors. "No idea," he admitted. "But if they were smart enough to disable power first," he looked directly at her again, "then this is not an infestation." Another distant impact rolled through the vessel. Closer to the command decks now. Ethan tightened his grip on the alloy restraint bar and started walking again toward the central lift shafts. This ship is being hunted. The central lift shaft opened into chaos. Smoke rolled across the command sector in thick gray waves while damaged emergency lights flashed overhead like distant lightning trapped inside the ship. Sparks rained from exposed wiring along the ceiling, filling the air with the sharp smell of melted insulation and overheated metal. Carvac soldiers rushed through the corridors carrying injured crew members, while automated defense systems barked short bursts somewhere beyond the bulkheads. Yet beneath all of it, Ethan Cross noticed something worse. The silence between the alarms. The ship sounded afraid. He stepped out of the lift beside General Veilira and immediately scanned the corridor ahead. "Two. Open," he muttered. Veilira looked toward him sharply. "The command deck is 30 yards away." "Exactly." Ethan tightened his grip on the restraint bar. "Nothing has attacked this sector yet." One of the surviving officers nearby overheard him and frowned. "Because our defenses are stronger here." Ethan slowly shook his head. Predators do not avoid strong prey. Before anyone could respond, the entire deck trembled violently beneath them. The lights flickered out for half a second. Then every tactical display in the corridor suddenly filled with warning symbols at once. Hull rupture detected near reactor spine 3. Containment breach spreading. Unknown biological signatures advancing toward command sectors. The officer nearest the wall console turned pale blue beneath his armor markings. "They are moving faster than before." Veilira activated her communicator instantly. "Seal all access corridors leading to the bridge." Static answered her. Nothing else. Ethan noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. Communication systems were failing now too. Whatever boarded the vessel had planned this carefully. Another impact echoed from somewhere nearby. This one loud enough to bend the corridor walls with a metallic groan. Several soldiers raised their weapons instinctively toward the darkness ahead. Then came the sound. Slow footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. Not running. Approaching. Ethan immediately stepped in front of the nearest injured crew members without even thinking about it. Veilira noticed. So did everyone else. The human prisoner had just shielded alien soldiers using his own body. One of the Carvax officers stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you do that?" Ethan never looked away from the corridor ahead. "Because panic gets people killed." The footsteps stopped. Complete silence swallowed the hallway again. Then the emergency lights shifted from crimson to deep black for 3 full seconds before reactivating. In that darkness, something moved at the far end of the corridor. Tall. Thin. Wrong. Veilira fired first. A burst of blue plasma streaked down the hall and illuminated the figure for a fraction of a second before it vanished upward into the ceiling shadows with impossible speed. Several soldiers panicked immediately, firing into the darkness above them. Ethan grabbed one rifle barrel and shoved it downward hard. "Stop shooting at shadows," he snapped. "That is exactly what it wants." Another metallic shriek tore through the ventilation system overhead. Then suddenly the corridor ceiling collapsed 20 feet behind them in a storm of sparks and shattered steel. Soldiers scattered. Alarms screamed louder. Ethan spun instantly toward the impact, while others hesitated in confusion. Through the smoke and flashing lights, he saw movement rushing toward the terrified rear line of crew members trapped near the damaged wall. Fast. Too fast for exhausted minds to process. Ethan moved before anyone else did. He sprinted straight into the smoke despite his weakened condition, boots slamming against the steel deck while warning sirens howled around him. Cross. Veilira shouted in shock. Ethan ignored her. A second later, the smoke erupted outward as he slammed the alloy restraint bar against something hidden inside the haze with a deafening metallic crack. The impact shook his entire arm to the shoulder. Whatever he hit screeched and disappeared back into the darkness above. Ethan staggered one step, but stayed standing. The corridor fell silent again except for alarms and heavy breathing. Every soldier stared at the human now. Sweat rolled down Ethan's face while he steadied himself against the wall, exhausted muscles visibly trembling from strain and dehydration. Yet his eyes remained locked upward toward the ceiling vents. Hunting back, Veilira slowly lowered her plasma weapon. "You charged it," she whispered. Ethan wiped blood from the corner of his mouth with the back of his hand. "On Earth," he said quietly, "if something wants to eat you." He looked toward the darkness above them again. "You teach it, the meal fights back." The march toward the command bridge became a running battle against fear itself. Emergency bulkheads sealed and reopened throughout the warship with thunderous impacts, while smoke drifted through every corridor like storm clouds trapped inside steel lungs. The deeper they moved into the command sectors, the quieter the ship became. That frightened Ethan Cross more than the creatures. Warships were never quiet. Not during crisis. Not during survival. But now entire sections of the vessel felt abandoned. Empty. Like prey already swallowed whole. Ethan limped slightly as he moved beside General Veilira through the damaged corridors, exhaustion dragging at him harder with every passing minute. His knuckles were split from gripping the alloy restraint bar too tightly, and his breathing carried the rough edge of dehydration. Yet his eyes remained sharp, searching constantly, calculating distances, angles, escape routes. Veilira noticed all of it. She also noticed something else. Her soldiers had unconsciously formed around him. Not her. Around the human. They watched where he looked. They stopped when he stopped. Even now, battle-hardened Carvax warriors trusted the instincts of a species they once mocked as primitive. Ahead of them, the final security doors leading to the command bridge flickered under unstable power. Sparks burst from damaged control panels beside the entrance while warning symbols flashed across the reinforced steel. Ethan slowed immediately. "Something is wrong," he said quietly. One officer frowned. "Of course something is wrong." Ethan shook his head once. "No. Listen." Everyone fell silent. For several seconds, only distant alarms echoed through the corridor. Then Veilira heard it too. Nothing. No bridge chatter. No officers. No tactical updates. Complete silence behind the most important room on the ship. Ethan stepped toward the sealed doors carefully. "Bridge crews do not abandon command stations," he murmured. Veilira activated the emergency override beside the damaged panel. The doors groaned open halfway before stopping abruptly under failed hydraulics. Smoke spilled through the narrow gap. Ethan moved first without hesitation, forcing himself through the opening while gripping the alloy bar tightly in one hand. The bridge beyond looked like the aftermath of a hurricane trapped inside metal walls. Holographic displays sparked violently. Navigation consoles flickered in and out beneath showers of broken glass. Several crew members huddled behind overturned command stations near the far end of the room, while emergency lights painted everything in pulses of red and black. Admiral Sarikar stood near the shattered observation window at the center of the bridge, holding a plasma rifle with both hands. His normally calm expression vanished the instant he saw Veilira enter. "General," he said sharply, "it is inside the ship's systems." Ethan immediately looked toward the damaged central console, where streams of corrupted code raced across the tactical displays faster than anyone could read. "The creatures infected the network." "Not infected," Sarikar replied darkly. "Controlled." A sudden metallic shriek echoed through the ventilation system above them. Crew members flinched instantly. Ethan looked up toward the ceiling vents. "How long?" 20 minutes since they breached the bridge perimeter. Sarikar's grip tightened on the rifle. "They are testing us." Another impact slammed somewhere inside the walls behind the bridge. Closer now. The ceiling panels rattled violently overhead. Then the tactical display changed by itself. Every screen on the bridge suddenly went black before a single line of translated text appeared in cold white letters across the darkness. "You are not the predators here." Silence crushed the room. Even the alarms seemed distant now. One terrified crew member whispered something under his breath. Veolyra slowly looked toward Ethan. She expected fear, shock, maybe panic. Instead, the exhausted human stared at the message with something far worse in his eyes. Recognition. Ethan stepped closer to the screen slowly while every person on the bridge watched him. "No," he said quietly. "That is where you are wrong." The lights flickered violently again. Then every ventilation grate on the bridge burst open at once. The bridge erupted into motion the instant the ventilation grates burst apart overhead. Smoke and sparks flooded the command deck, while crew members scattered behind damaged consoles and overturned command stations. Plasma fire lit the darkness in sharp blue flashes that reflected across shattered observation glass overlooking the endless stars beyond. The ship. Yet through all the chaos, Ethan Cross moved with terrifying clarity. Exhaustion still dragged at every step. His body ached from dehydration, sleeplessness, and days of captivity. But something older than pain had awakened inside him now. Survival instinct. The thing humans carried long before they built starships. General Veolyra saw at the moment he stepped forward instead of back. Most beings retreated from fear. Ethan advanced into it. The creature dropped from the ceiling near the central tactical station in a blur of black movement and metallic limbs. Larger than the others. Smarter too. Its body shifted strangely beneath the emergency lights as if parts of it were not fully solid. Several soldiers froze at the sight alone. Ethan did not. He grabbed a fallen plasma rifle from the floor with his free hand and slammed the rifle stock against a nearby coolant pipe instead of firing. The pipe ruptured instantly, releasing a cloud of freezing vapor across the bridge. The creature recoiled violently as frost spread across its dark surface. "Temperature sensitive," Ethan shouted immediately. "Hit the coolant systems." Crew members snapped out of panic almost instantly. Officers rerouted emergency coolant through damaged vents while engineers triggered pressure releases across the bridge walls. White vapor exploded through the command deck in freezing waves. The creature screeched and disappeared upward again into the smoke-filled ceiling. Ethan staggered briefly against a console afterward, breathing heavily now. His hands trembled from fatigue. Veolyra moved toward him instinctively. "You are collapsing." Ethan wiped sweat from his face and looked toward the damaged tactical displays. Later, another impact shook the bridge violently. More creatures were approaching through the ventilation systems. Sarakar shouted commands across the deck while soldiers repositioned around the freezing coolant fog rapidly spreading through the chamber. Veolyra looked toward Ethan again. "How are you still functioning?" Ethan gave a weak laugh between breaths. "Humans are stubborn." Then the tactical display behind him flickered back to life. A new message appeared. Across every screen on the bridge. "Your species resists termination." Ethan stared at the glowing words silently for a second before answering the screen, like he was speaking to another soldier across a battlefield. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That has been a problem for a lot of people." The bridge lights stabilized suddenly. One by one, warning alarms across the ship began shutting down. Ventilation activity stopped. Motion trackers cleared. Then complete silence settled over the command deck once more. No scratching. No movement. No impacts inside the walls. The creatures were retreating. Crew members slowly lowered their weapons in disbelief while damaged systems rebooted around them. Ethan finally exhaled deeply and leaned both hands against the console beside him, exhaustion visibly catching him all at once. His legs nearly gave out beneath him. Veolyra stepped forward immediately and caught his arm before he fell. For a moment neither spoke. Crimson emergency light reflected softly across her golden eyes while cold vapor drifted through the ruined bridge around them. Ethan looked toward her weakly. "Told you," he murmured hoarsely. "Earth is not a civilized place." Veolyra stared at him for several long seconds. Then, slowly, the Carvax general did something no officer on that bridge had ever witnessed before. She lowered herself onto one knee before the exhausted human prisoner. Silence spread across the command deck instantly. Even Admiral Sarikar looked stunned. Veilira reached up and removed the black prisoner identification band still hanging from Ethan's wrist. Carefully, almost reverently, she replaced it with the silver insignia of a Carvax War Guardian, the highest warrior honor in the Dominion. Ethan looked down at the insignia in confusion. Veilira's voice remained quiet when she finally spoke. I thought humans survived because they feared death less than other species. Her eyes lifted to meet his. Now I understand. You survive because you refuse to abandon each other. Ethan stared at her silently while stars drifted beyond the shattered bridge windows behind them. Somewhere deep inside the damaged warship, emergency systems slowly came back to life. But on that silent bridge filled with smoke and frozen air, General Veilira Thorne realized something far more dangerous than any creature that had boarded her vessel. Humanity was not terrifying because it was violent. Humanity was terrifying because even broken, exhausted, and alone, it still chose to protect others first.